The closing bell has rung, but the business story continues. I'm Robert Tanner watching Business Brief. Let's get started. U.S. President Donald Trump says the two-week ceasefire with Iran ends this Wednesday with no extension. Credit rating agency Fitch lowers its outlook for the Philippines from stable to negative. And Bilyonaryo Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala steps down as chairman of Globe Telecom. U.S. President Donald Trump says the two-week ceasefire with Iran ends Wednesday evening Washington time. He adds that it's highly unlikely it will be extended if a peace agreement is not reached before then. Vice President J.D. Vance and other U.S. officials are flying to Pakistan on Tuesday ahead of a potential second round of peace talks. But Iran's top negotiator previously said Tehran will not negotiate with the U.S. if it issues threats. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu asserts Israel has not yet finished its task in Iran, with a two-week ceasefire about to expire. Trump announced the two-week ceasefire with Iran on April 7.
Our flag is planted from deep within the Gaza Strip all the way to the crown of Mount Hermon, and our pilots control the skies of the region as irrefutable proof of our superiority over the Iranian axis. We have not yet finished the task, but the world already recognizes our determination to defend ourselves. Not only to defend ourselves, but to defend humanity from barbaric fanaticism. Small Israel and our great friend, the United States, carry the entire Western civilization on their shoulders.
Meanwhile, a second round of talks between Israel and Lebanon is scheduled for Thursday. That's according to Israeli and U.S. officials. French President Emmanuel Macron calls on the U.S. and Iran to de-escalate tensions at the Strait of Hormuz. The French leader cites the Washington's targeted blockade and Iran's decision to close the strait again. Macron asserts the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened without tolls.
Il faut continuer de calmer les esprits.
We must continue to calm tempers, to move toward the reopening of this route, which is important for international trade, international energy security, and also because these are direct consequences for the lives of our compatriots in Poland, in France, across Europe, and even beyond, across the world. Our position remains the same. We need to settle things through diplomacy. Everyone must calm down. We must return to the decisions that had been agreed on Friday. We must maintain the ceasefire, including Lebanon, for as long as possible and build a lasting peace solution through negotiation on the nuclear issue, the ballistic missiles, Hormuz, and the rest.
Global oil prices fall on expectations that U.S.-Iran peace talks will resume this week. As of 1:43 p.m. Manila time, West Texas Intermediate is down to nearly $88 per barrel, while Brent crude is trading above $93 a barrel. Worries over potential disruptions to oil shipments from the Persian Gulf if Iran continues to restrict tanker movement through the Strait of Hormuz are weighing on investor sentiment. Credit rating agency Fitch lowers its outlook for the Philippines from stable to negative. Ivy Reyes joins us live for the details. Go ahead, Ivy.
Yes, Robert, following Fitch's outlook for the Philippines as of April 20, which is down to a negative from its previous stable rating, the Marcos administration echoed the agency's statement that a negative outlook does not mean an imminent downgrade. According to Fitch, their outlook revision reflects risks to the country's strong medium growth due to the impact of global energy shocks to public investment. The credit rating of the Philippines, however, was affirmed at BBB, which for Fitch means the country can still grow its medium-term GDP and register a gradual reduction in government debt. Robert, in Fitch's key rating drivers, the wake of the flood control scandal was mentioned to be a factor as to why growth slowed to a 4.4% in 2025 from 2024's 5.7%. This is largely due to the reduced public capital expenditures observed drop when investigations into the scandal commenced. Higher inflation is also expected to incur higher risks for the Philippines should energy shocks prolong its impact, especially for household spending. Fitch further assessed that our investment has run below pre-pandemic trend and remains under pressure from recent pullbacks in public investment. On the bright side, Fitch lauds efforts to bounce back from these headwinds, including reforms attracting more foreign direct investments or FDIs, mining regulations, and enhanced participation of the private sector. Meanwhile, the Uplift Committee of the President, tasked to oversee government response to these price shocks, just suspended the truck ban for vehicles transporting basic commodities. But for those not exempted, truck ban is scheduled from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Aside from these developments, the palace said they're pushing all efforts to avoid stagnation, which is why employment and oil supply remain top priorities. As of April 20, Robert, the country's average oil supply will now last up to 52 days, according to the Energy Department. Meanwhile, the palace also announced the president has approved a 46.22 billion peso allocation for about 1,700 infrastructure projects nationwide. Robert, the suspension of excise tax on diesel and gas was never discussed in the Uplift Committee meeting this morning, and the palace did not expound as to why it was never in their agenda. As of now, that's all the updates I have from Malacanang. Robert.
Thank you for that update, Ivy Reyes. Meanwhile, a fund expert is warning against a rate hike from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, saying current inflation is driven by a supply shock. On BNC's Business 360, call Strategic Growth Fund President Marvin Fausto cautions that further monetary tightening could worsen existing economic challenges.
The market, you're talking about the economists, no? The survey of economists or analysts, they're saying there's going to be a rate hike.
Yes.
But I don't agree. I don't agree that there should be a rate hike. This is a supply shock. This is not a demand issue. So when you increase interest rates, you're talking about managing the demand side. The supply, we don't have any control over the supply. Increasing rates will even increase the issues that we are already facing, right? If you increase interest, you're tightening the economy, you're tightening the monetary supply. It is not good for the economy.
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas meets on April 23 to decide on its policy direction amid risks from the effects of the Middle East conflict. Dozens of U.S. veterans and military family members were detained by Capitol Police after they started protesting the Iran war inside the Congress building in Washington, D.C. on Monday. The protesters held a flag-folding ceremony in the Cannon House office building. They are part of a veteran-led group called About Face.
I personally am here for my sons. As a veteran, I know the harm that wars do to civilian populations, but also to our soldiers. I'm talking about the loss of life. I'm talking about injuries and lives changed forever. I'm talking about PTSD and moral injury, and that's why I'm here today.
Over 60 of the 150 protesters were arrested. New Clark City is set to become the center of a new industrial hub in the Philippines focused on artificial intelligence and semiconductor development. This follows the Philippines' official membership in the U.S.-led Pax Silica Declaration, which aims to build a secure and resilient global supply chain. The 1,618-hectare site will serve as a golden node, attracting investments in AI, semiconductors, and advanced manufacturing while strengthening global supply networks. The project positions the country as a more active player in the global tech ecosystem and supports the push to become a regional AI powerhouse. The Department of Energy says it is open to lifting the moratorium on building new coal plants as the global oil issues persist amid the Middle East conflict. The Department of Energy Secretary Sharon Garin said the use of coal would be considered as long as cleaner technology would be used. She added that these coal power plants will eventually transition to cleaner energy. Garin also said the DOE will also look for other energy sources. The DOE said coal still accounts for 63% of the country's power generation. The Philippine government strengthens ties with the U.S. private sector to push economic reforms, attract investments, and create more jobs. At a business roundtable, Finance Secretary Frederick Go highlights priority sectors including semiconductors, renewable energy, infrastructure, and tourism. U.S. business groups, including the U.S. ASEAN Business Council and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, expressed support for the country's economic agenda and signaled deeper collaboration. Goss says strong growth, manageable inflation, and a stable policy environment position the Philippines as a competitive investment destination in Asia. Motorists welcome another round of fuel price rollbacks on Tuesday as Che Sulit tells us more fuel shipments are also arriving.
Motorists are lining up at this gas station in Quezon City, already enjoying the relief at the pump. Oil companies have implemented the fuel price rollback prescribed by the government. The Energy Department states the following price adjustments effective this Tuesday. Diesel prices are slashed by 24 pesos and 94 centavos per liter, gasoline by 3 pesos and 41 centavos per liter, and kerosene by 2 pesos per liter. Motorists welcome the second week of lower fuel prices.
Ang laki ng binaba, lalo na sa akin, diesel yung gamit ko eh. So mas malaki yung mas binaba compare sa gas. So okay, sana magtuloy-tuloy.
Energy Secretary Sharon Garin said that oil companies are now mandated to comply with the price adjustments set by the government.
May limit na tayo, may minimum na tayo sa rollback, tapos may maximum din tayo sa price increase. So both ways.
Garin says the policy follows PBBM's Executive Order number 110, declaring a state of national energy emergency. The energy chief also says this is part of the agency's efforts to prevent profiteering. However, Garin clarifies that the government's control over the price adjustments is not arbitrary and still in accordance with calculations based on global market data. She adds that the government is implementing a cap on the price adjustments, not the prices. But for some motorists, the second week of rollbacks isn't enough.
Sana bumaba pa ulit kasi mabigat pa rin eh. Kung pwede, ibaba pa ulit para babalik sa dating presyo.
Meanwhile, Garin says that the country's fuel inventory has increased to an average of 52.02 days as of April 17, up by 2 days from previous levels. The DOE attributes this to steady fuel deliveries and a drop in nationwide consumption. The breakdown of available supply shows gasoline at 54 days, diesel at 50 days, and LPG at just over 40 days. Kerosene has the highest buffer at nearly 130 days, while jet fuel and fuel oil stand at about 60 and 78 days respectively. Energy Undersecretary Sandy Sales earlier confirmed the purchase of 21,000 metric tons of LPG from the United States, which is expected to arrive in May. The DOE says that the third diesel cargo ordered by the Philippine National Oil Company Exploration Corporation is set to arrive this Tuesday morning. The shipment carries around 320,000 barrels of diesel and will be offloaded at the Subic terminal in Zambales. Another shipment carrying 330,000 barrels of diesel is scheduled for delivery this Friday. Che Sulit, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
Senators are weighing the administration's response to the ongoing fuel crisis, who are supporting the government's decisions and who are criticizing the measures. Hannah T is on the line with the details. Hannah?
Robert, while some senators are backing the move under the state of national energy emergency, Senator Jaime Marcos led the criticism. Marcos asserts the government's powers have always existed and should have been used earlier. She questioned why authorities are only now limiting price increases and enforcing minimum rollbacks even as prices are already easing. For the presidential sister, the delay has already hurt key sectors, with some drivers forced to stop operating, farmers unable to harvest their crops, and fisher folk unable to go out to sea due to high fuel costs. She said government action should have come immediately after the declaration of a national energy emergency. But Senate President Tito Soto expressed support for the government's current response. Soto says he agrees with the measures being taken to address the oil crisis. But at the same time, Soto raised a broader policy issue, calling for a review or even the possible removal of the oil deregulation law. He said under the current system, the government cannot fully scrutinize oil companies, such as how much they paid for fuel or when it was purchased, powers that were available before deregulation. Meanwhile, Senate President Pro Tempore Ping Lacson backed the Department of Energy's move. Lacson says government intervention is necessary as long as price adjustments are fair and based on reasonable computation. He said this is better than leaving fuel pricing entirely to oil firms, especially during a crisis. This is after the DOE implemented a system that sets a minimum rollback and a maximum increase in fuel prices following the President's declaration of a national energy emergency. For this week, Robert, the DOE set a minimum rollback of 24 pesos and 94 centavos per liter for diesel, 3 pesos and 41 cents for gasoline, and 2 pesos for kerosene. Oil companies are required to comply, and violators may face possible penalties, including fines, imprisonment, or even the revocation of business permits. Back to you, Robert.
Thank you for that report, Hanati. We'll take a short break. This is Business Brief. A fragile ceasefire, a rallying market, and a Philippine economy that imports nearly all of its oil from the middle of a war zone. The next 2 weeks could determine whether this recovery holds or unravels. And today we break down what that means for your money. And joining us this afternoon is Mark Angeles of First Metro Securities, and he has been tracking Philippine equities through every twist of this crisis. He's the analyst behind the market strategy report that's been making the rounds in investment circles this week. Mark, good afternoon. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Robert. Nice to be here again.
Okay, now, Mark, let's start with this. Philippine equities had strong momentum coming into the year. Then February 28 happened, and months of gains unraveled in weeks. Now, markets are rallying on a 2-week ceasefire. How durable is this recovery?
Well, look at it this way. It's conditionally durable, meaning it hinges on the outlook, whether they resolve the issues between the U.S. and Iran. But for the time being, is that you have unresolved macro geopolitical tensions that's still having an impact on our economic outlook. That's one, and also inflation. So if we see a more durable ceasefire coming out within the next few days, then again, this rally will be durable as well.
Well, you said conditional. Now,
yes.
Your report says the U.S. and Iranian negotiating positions are fundamentally incompatible. Now, from a market standpoint, what outcome are you actually positioning for, and what's your timeline? What are you looking at?
Well, actually, this is a very difficult thing. As an analyst, we always have a base case. We always have a call. But given this as a geopolitical situation, it is very, very difficult to have a base case. So from our standpoint, we do have two scenarios. One is if you go into a durable ceasefire or you re-escalate. But for the time being, we're positioned for a what we call rolling ceasefire, meaning it gets extended as
everything becomes fluid.
Yeah, it becomes fluid until they get to agree on something, diba? So that's something that we do recognize.
Now, the Philippines sources over 96% of its crude oil from the Middle East. How much of that vulnerability is structural, and is there a credible roadmap to reduce that?
I think almost all of that is vulnerable, right? It's structurally vulnerable. But in the past few years, we've been our energy demand, our energy supply has been shifting towards RE. So that's a good roadmap. But we're not there yet. Most of the RE projects will come in later on, sometime in the next few years. So if you're asking me if there's a roadmap in the short term, I don't think so.
No.
I mean, those takes years, not quarters.
Now, looking at the peso, Mark, it has historically moved in lockstep with oil, over 60% correlation based on what your research says. Now, going back a decade, now we saw that play out sharply in March. How central is currency risk to the Philippine equity thesis right now?
Well, again, oil moves, the FX moves, right? The FX move will translate into inflation expectations and also policy expectations. In short, the peso is not a background variable, but rather a main transmission channel of energy price shock into the economy. So it plays a very important role right now. That's why we're monitoring it.
Now, looking at that, the BSP is in a very tough spot right now. Inflation is front-loaded. Growth risk is back-loaded. In your assessment, how much room does the BSP actually have to maneuver over the next 6 months, especially they're meeting this April 23?
Well, I think they're operating in a very tight corridor driven by geopolitical tension. So that's very tough for them. Our view is it is not a policy direction problem, but rather a sequencing. Right now, they pause. They did that special meeting where they said they're going to pause in terms of monetary policy. And coming up next few days, I think they're still going to maintain a pause. But the language will depend on either we do have a ceasefire or not. If we have a ceasefire, that sequencing becomes really easy. You pause now and then wait for inflation to roll over, then you go back to some sort of policy normalization. But if we have a re-escalation of things, then the policy becomes very tricky because you have to pause, then you have to wait for inflation to pick up. If inflation picks up higher than your comfort zone, then you have to raise rates. Then only until you see a durable ceasefire or a demand destruction, then the BSP.
But how long can we wait it out? If you're mentioning it should be a pause, there are some saying that there could be a rate hike, but some are warning that if there is a rate hike, that could spell different things that's going to happen in the next couple of months.
Yes, actually, this is what you call a supply shock. So monetary policies are less effective. You usually have the fiscal works better here. But I agree with on that view that if you do hike rates now preemptively, then you will accelerate that demand destruction, which we don't want to happen at the moment.
Now, looking at your research, Mark, it shows foreign outflows around the 62 million mark, capital outflows in the equities in March alone. Now, what specific conditions are regional fund managers waiting for to come back in?
Well, FYI, right? The Philippines is one of the most energy-exposed economies in Asia. So when you have an oil price shock like this, then definitely Philippines are one of the main countries that will be sold off. We saw that. We saw a lot of outflows coming from a lot of inflows in the past few months, right? So the thing is, for them to come back is that you have to unwind that macro drag. You have to have some sort of macro relief, which requires a ceasefire, which requires inflation to roll over, which requires pesos to stabilize, and also a firmer policy direction for policy rates.
How are we seeing the local markets now? As we see now, the easing of the oil prices, we had a massive rollback today. How do you see the markets working?
Well, it's a wait and see. Yep. When the ceasefire was announced last week, right, or 2 weeks before, that the market climbed from 5.8 to 6,000, 6,100. Now we're staying at that level. I think it's a wait and see. We know that everything hinges on one geopolitical outcome. That one geopolitical outcome will determine the market returns in the next few quarters.
But the last time we spoke, even before the crisis happened, it was still kind of a wait and see.
Yes.
The market was like so. With the crisis now, in the middle of a crisis, how much of that has increased the wait and see mark of investors here?
It did increase uncertainty. I mean, last time we spoke, we were waiting for foreign funds to come in. Come February, we saw a lot of foreign funds come in. That's why we hit around 6.6, 6.7, right? Then now
we saw an exit.
We saw an exit because of our sensitivity to the oil price shock. I guess we're still waiting for that. At the moment, I feel like the market is still transitory in terms of how the oil price shock will impact the economy. It's just a transitory impact for the time being. Nothing structural yet, but duration is key. The longer that we are in this scenario, the longer the oil prices are higher, then the risk, the transitory risk becomes more structural moving forward.
Now, it was mentioned that the ceasefire repricing playbook is phased and sequential, but markets rarely follow a clean script. Now, where is it most vulnerable to breaking down?
Well, between phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is all about repricing, pricing out the risk premium. Meaning, if you have a ceasefire, that risk premium that has been embedded in the market will come off, right? So the next step is all about macro confirmation. So that is where things are become more vulnerable. Meaning, do we have structural damage? Is inflation rolling over? Is the peso stabilizing? Are we seeing high-frequency economic data trending in the right direction? So those are the main factors that I think are very crucial from transitioning from a pricing out risk premium into more of a macro confirmation.
Now, you were mentioning a while ago that if there is a durable ceasefire, things could get better, maybe not too quickly, but smoothly. But you're forecasting oil settles into a new equilibrium at $80 to $90, which is still above pre-conflict levels. Now, what does that sustained higher energy cost mean for corporate margins and household spendings if it remains at that high level,
well,
even during a durable ceasefire?
Let me explain to you first why we are forecasting a higher oil price. One is that we now realize that we have an oil surplus globally, but they're all stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. That's one.
Can't get out.
Can't get out. So the other thing is, we had this problem. If we get the durable ceasefire, the main thing that I think will happen is that all the countries will have oil reserves. So there will be a demand in the near term. Another thing, there will be a premium on oil not coming from the Middle East because it carries a guarantee that your oil will be delivered to you on a certain time. So that will somewhat elevate oil prices. So again, we don't expect it to go back to pre-event levels, but then if that's the case, then we're going to see some impact on corporate margins, especially on the logistics side. Diesel is the backbone of the logistics of this country, right? Of the Philippines. It's been very high for extended period of time.
Yeah, it's a domino effect with the high prices and logistics. Prices go up in stages. Yes.
Yeah, so thinner margins for corporates and also for households is that the impact will be more on purchasing power. So inflation on food, transport will hit purchasing power. Hence, I think the recovery will be somewhat gradual rather than a V-shaped recovery once we get out of this.
Now, looking at the markets, some of your names to avoid are food manufacturers, yield plays, logistics businesses that are being affected are among the most widely held by retail investors. Now, how should they reposition without making reactive decisions they might regret in the future?
Well, I mean, it's not a reactive decision to be an all for nothing, all or nothing type of approach. We are not recommending liquidation. We are recommending rotation into names that will benefit from a ceasefire repricing playbook, meaning you lessen the vulnerabilities and lean into the beneficiaries. And that's how we're positioning it. Now, I think the opportunity is in the rotation, not in the liquidation.
Now, in this crisis, I've been hearing a lot about allocation of assets. In your view, how much of a diversification should happen amidst a crisis in terms of your portfolio?
At this stage, right, we had this report before. We are now in what we call status quo. You can still be bullish on equities, but the longer that this goes on, then you can increase your exposure in cash. But given that it's been almost 2 months already since this crisis started, I would prefer having a lot of exposure in cash, lesser on bonds, because the bond yields, if the BSP does have a sequencing problem, the bond yields will spike first. Only when the growth becomes a problem, then they can cut, and that's the time to go into bonds. So for now, we are somewhat heavy on cash, and then focus on defensive equity names.
Now, looking at that, several of your buy-rated stocks are down 15 to 20% over 12 months. Are these genuine value opportunities, or has the market already seen something the price targets haven't really fully absorbed?
Well, if you look at the overall market, right, we are at, 600 bips in terms of equity risk premium. That is plus 2 SD. So you're really pricing at tail risk. So once that risk from Middle East comes off, right, we have the view that our picks are more of value opportunities rather than value traps.
Now, for someone who's not really that savvy in investments, what would that mean? If somebody who's a new investor who wants to look at the market, what does that mean for them? What should they look at?
Well, you look at quality names, meaning with defensive earnings, even in this crisis, they're able to generate earnings or pay dividends. That's one. You got to go into names that are very resilient. For example, the groceries are one. I would, again, we don't like food manufacturers just because of the exposure to raw materials and logistics.
And the prices.
And the prices, right? And also, the DTI price freeze. So they have to absorb the margin in terms of their margins. So we like the utilities as well. We like the water companies, the electric as well. Malls are very good. Sometimes they tell you malls are cyclical, but again, they're kind of pseudo-defensive. In a warm weather like this, or very hot weather, I mean, going to the mall is better than staying at home, right?
Yeah. Now, looking at the ratings agency, we just saw that Fitch revised the Philippines outlook from stable to negative yesterday, maintaining the BBB rating, but flagging the energy shock and slowing public investment as real risks. Now, S&P moved in a similar direction earlier this month. Are rating agencies telling us something the market hasn't really fully priced in yet?
Well, I think it's priced in. I mean, you can see it in the equity risk premium. That's one. We already flagged that the fiscal balance is not the best shape it has been, and also this one with slowing growth and increasing fiscal spending to help the households bridge to this the oil crisis, right? So it puts pressure on the fiscal balances of the government. So we do understand, we understand their point, but again, it doesn't mean that you will be downgraded anytime soon.
Yeah, it's just an outlook, so we still have time. They've given us time to make changes.
Yes.
But what kind of changes should happen?
Well, first you can outgrow your debt. That's the best course of action. Or you can do what the Europeans did back in the early 2010 European crisis, where they did some austerity measures. But I think the best way to go about it is just outgrow the debt.
How can we do that?
Well, you got to do some infrastructure projects. You got to go back. You got to revive the consumer confidence, business confidence. Tough to do.
Yes, especially coming from a lot of issues back in the flood control projects.
Correct.
Infrastructure projects have slowed down.
But at some point, you have to go back. You have to go back to some sort of normal government spending. And that's one. I think confidence is the main issue here.
Do you see that happening
not in the
near term? Not this year or next year?
Not in the near term. Probably late this year when we're out of this oil energy price shock, right? So hopefully by then, we see a little bit more confidence come back. But I think the government's effort to provide support, fiscal support, also from a work from home standpoint, has helped a lot of confidence in consumption, at least.
Now, Mark, in every forecast, there are risks that don't make it into the base case. Now, outside of your two scenarios, what's the development that could catch markets most off guard?
Again, we talked about the weakest link a while ago, within the transition within phase 1 and phase 2. It's all about the eco data, trending in the right direction. I mean, for the first phase, you just price out the equity risk premium that is embedded because of the oil price shock, right? When that comes off, you need a data confirmation to tell you that the economy has no structural damage and will recover.
Now, in terms of strategic moves, what has changed pre-crisis, and what are you doing in terms of adapting to the crisis that we're in right now?
Can you expound on that?
In terms of strategies, in terms of how people look at investments right now, people looking at the economy, when people try to look into the markets, what kind of strategies have changed? We've been mentioning, asset allocation, allocations of assets, diversification. What else has changed?
Surprisingly, we do have a lot of buying. I mean, we're seeing high net worth clients come in, scoop up prices, especially the ones
buy low, sell high.
Yeah, the ones that have been battered by this oil price shock. We've been seeing that. We've been seeing some positioning of a lot of high net worth clients.
Now, Mark, finally, beyond the models and the scenarios that we're seeing, millions of Filipinos are just trying to manage rising costs at home today. Now, what's the most important thing they should understand about where the economy stands right now? Where are we going?
Well, the economy is under pressure. That's a fact. From oil prices, from lesser government spend, we can name it, even weaker confidence. But the underlying thing is that the economy is not falling off a cliff. That's one. We're seeing the government being proactive in terms of fiscal, also from the monetary side. So we think that at the end of the day, we will see this improvement on a gradual basis because the government support is there and to help bridge the Filipinos or household in this oil price shock.
Okay, on that note, Mark, always great to hear your insights about the market. Hopefully, we'll get through this. As they always say, this too shall pass, but hopefully soon, not later. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we'll take a short break. This is Business Brief. We have this just in. Ombudsman Jesus Crispin Remulla has reportedly rejected late Representative and former Speaker Martin Romualdez's request for a travel clearance to allow him to fly to Singapore for a medical checkup. In a letter dated April 20, Romualdez informed Speaker Faustino D. that he would be in Singapore from April 20 to May 4 to undergo a long overdue follow-up on his angioplasty surgery. But the former Speaker's camp asserts Romualdez is not barred from leaving the country. It also clarifies that an immigration lookout bulletin has been issued against Romualdez, and this does not prevent him from flying abroad. Earlier this month, Remulla said the Ombudsman is preparing to file plunder charges against Romualdez in connection with his alleged link to flood control projects. The charges could be filed within the month of May. U.S. Customs and Border Protection launches the first phase of a new claim system that will allow importers to seek repayment of tariffs collected under the International Emergency Economic Powers. Companies and their custom brokers can submit refund requests through CBP's automated commercial environment portal. Once validated, the CBP will recalculate the duties and reliquidate the entries. Refunds will generally be issued within 60 to 90 days. The Supreme Court ruled in February that U.S. President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs are unconstitutional. Chile and the United States partner on mining and security, according to the Chilean government. The Chilean government describes the agreement as part of its strategic efforts to strengthen cooperation in key sectors.
Muy buenas tardes.
Chile is acting with strategic vision. This type of instrument makes it possible to organize a cooperation agenda in areas such as financing, innovation, productive development, and value chains, all key elements for the country's positioning. We share the same hemisphere and we have shared many things, and we must deepen our relationship. That is the purpose of this effort, that we can be more effective with the help of our neighboring countries and also the countries of the region. We cannot fight drug trafficking, organized crime, money laundering, and transnational crime alone.
The agreements build on earlier discussions between Chile and the U.S. on critical minerals, including rare earths. Both sides are coordinating on mining investment, recycling of mineral resources, and the exploration of new supply sources. Iraq has reopened the Rabia border crossing with Syria after more than a decade. The move aims to accelerate land travel of fuel oil exports amid the disruption to Gulf shipping due to the Iran war. The crossing northern Iraq will also allow commercial trade traffic. The head of Iraq's Border Ports Commission said reopening Rabia would ease pressure on fuel shipments. Japan unveils its biggest overhaul of defense export rules in decades, scrapping restrictions on overseas arms sales. The move opens the way for exports of warships, missiles, and other weapons. Japan's chief cabinet secretary said the biggest export rule change was needed to ensure its security while contributing to regional stability. The changes removed 5 export categories that limited most military exports to rescue, transport, warning, surveillance, and sweeping equipment. The country hopes such defense exports will boost its industrial base by increasing production volumes.
Today, no country can safeguard its own peace and security on its own. To protect both national and regional peace, it is important to further promote the transfer of defense equipment and strengthen the deterrence and response capabilities of allies and like-minded partners.
The Department of Migrant Workers is extending assistance and assurances of justice after 2 overseas Filipino workers were killed in a hostage incident in Lebanon. The 2 longtime domestic workers were fatally shot by their employer during a hostage situation in Beirut last April 15. The suspect has been arrested and is now under police custody pending formal charges. DMW officials are set to personally visit the victims' families to convey their condolences and assure full government support, including repatriation and benefits. Apple has taken a fresh bite into its future. The tech giant has named insider John Ternus as its next chief executive officer, handing the longtime hardware chief the reins as Apple prepares for a major shift driven by artificial intelligence. Ternus, who joined the company in 2001, has led hardware engineering efforts and helped revive sales of key products, including the Mac. In a statement, Apple says current CEO Tim Cook, who has led the company since 2011, will transition to executive chairman. The leadership change signals a shift from Cook's operations-driven era to a more product-focused approach as Apple gears up for its next phase of innovation. So fantastic, it could sell in Marvel movies. That's how former presidential advisor for political affairs, Jacinto Jing Paras, described the affidavit of Vice President Sara Duterte's alleged bagman, Ramil Madriaga. On BNC's On Point, Paras called the supposed term sharing between PBBM and VP Sara impossible, saying former President Rodrigo Duterte pushed for a Marcos Bongo tandem in the 2022 elections.
The most fantastic. John, siguro, Pinky, I will share. And for the first time, I will reveal the real score here. It came from the mouth of PRRD during the time when Bongo was supposed to run for president. We were all in Malacanang with all the governors, no? Tapos, all the governors were made to speak to support Bongo because he filed already a candidacy for president.
Sa PDP po ito?
Oh, PDP. Tapos, everybody supported except 2 governors. Ang feeling namin talaga, Bongo will win over Bongbong. But, bigla na lang naglaho dahil ayaw na ni Bongo.
Paras added that Madriaga's accusations are merely part of a fabricated narrative linked to former Senator Antonio Trillanes and ML Party List Representative Laila de Lima. Vice President Sara Duterte has excess funds not declared in her statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth, or SALN. That's according to Manila 6th District Representative Benny Abante. On BNC's The Spokes, Abante also revealed that the Vice President and her husband, Attorney Mans Carpio, have a number of companies aside from their law office.
We have already, copies of the SALN since she was mayor.
So hindi lang ano. So you will compare.
Kinumpare namin lahat yan until she became vice president.
But how were you able to obtain the SALN of when she was still mayor? Secret ba to?
I am not at liberty to say
your sources.
A Department of Information and Communications Technology official reminds banks and other establishments that the digital version of the national ID should be accepted anywhere. DICT Undersecretary Dave Almirol stressed this in an interview with Bilyonaryo News channels at the forefront amid complaints that some establishments refuse to recognize the digital national ID.
I was just talking to someone kanina, yung isa sa mga makeup artist natin dito sa studio. And she was saying na nagpunta siya sa bangko, ayaw tanggapin yung ID niya na nasa eGov app.
May circular na ang BSP that they need to accept it. In fact, mas maganda ngayong sa digital ID kasi may signature eh. Yung physical card nga natin, kaya hindi tinatanggap dati kasi wala siyang signature. But the eGov, through eGov, yung digital national ID, it has a signature in it. So mas kompleto yung details doon.
Almirol added that banks that refuse to accept the digital national ID can be reported to the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas.
So pag ayaw tanggapin, for example, ng bangko, considering there's already a BSP circular, can you report the bank?
I think so, because BSP already issued a circular that all banks should acknowledge the digital national ID, the same power as the physical IDs.
We'll take a short break. This is Business Brief. Bilyonaryo Jaime Augusto Zobel de Ayala steps down as chairman of Globe Telecom Incorporated, ending a more than 30-year tenure. Zobel served on the board for 37 years and as chairman since 1996. He will remain as chairman of Asiacom Philippines Incorporated, the Ayala Singtel joint venture that controls Globe. Under his leadership, Globe expanded through key acquisitions and a strategic partnership with Singapore Singtel, which helped drive its transformation into a digital telco. The company said Zobel was the principal architect of Globe's transformation into the country's first digital telco. It credited his vision for the company's evolution. In royal news, King Charles pays tribute to his late mother in an address marking what would have been Queen Elizabeth II's 100th birthday. Queen Elizabeth, Britain's longest reigning monarch, died in September 2022 at the age of 96. To commemorate the occasion, King Charles and Queen Camilla visited a new exhibition titled Queen Elizabeth II, Her Life in Style, currently on display at Buckingham Palace.
Her near century was one of remarkable change, and yet, through each passing decade, through every transformation, she remained constant, steadfast, and wholly devoted to the people she served. Millions will remember her for moments of national significance, many others for a fleeting personal encounter, a smile, a kind word that lifted spirits, or for that marvelous twinkle of the eye when sharing a marmalade sandwich with Paddington Bear in the final months of her life.
The exhibition features more than 300 items from the late monarch's wardrobe, including her wedding dress and the largest showcase of her fashion legacy to date. Asian shares are mostly higher, even as the outlook for U.S.-Iran talks aimed at ending the war remains uncertain. Among Asian markets, only ASX 200 is flat with a downward bias, with Kospi rising the most at almost 3%. In currency trading, the U.S. dollar trades mixed against the Asian currencies. In commodities, gold trades lower while oil prices drop. In crypto, Bitcoin drops 0.3%. Ethereum falls almost 0.9%. Philippine shares barely moved today. The PSCI closes flat with an upward bias to 60.18. Majority of these sectoral indices are in the green, with holding firms rising the most at over 1%. Advancers outpaced decliners 106 to 90, with value turnover at 6.9 billion pesos. The day's most active stocks are mixed, with BDO Unibank rising the most at almost 2%. Ayala Land falls the most at more than 2%. In currencies, the peso closes at 59.938 against the US dollar from the previous close of 59.97. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, flags 8 unlicensed crypto platforms operating without authority in the Philippines. In an advisory, the regulator warned that Ostium, Deriv, and Orderly, among others, have no corporate registration and are not authorized to act as securities brokers or dealers. Under the country's new crypto asset service provider rules, any platform targeting Filipino investors, regardless of base, must secure local registration and licensing. The move comes as the Philippines tightens financial oversight in a bid to exit the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, gray list. Vivan Transcorp Holdings Incorporated completes the acquisition of Bantayan Resource Management and Development Corporation, or Bremancor. This gives it full control of water distribution in Bantayan Island. The 100% equity buyout allows Vivant Water to take over operations, servicing more than 4,000 households. The deal marks the company's entry into the water distribution segment. It completes an integrated utilities model on the island, where it has been providing power through Isla Norte Power Corporation since 2022. Alliance Global Group Incorporated reports a record net income of 20.7 billion pesos in 2025, up 19% from the previous year. The company attributed the growth to resilient performance across its real estate and leisure segments. It said it delivered strong results despite macroeconomic headwinds, with most businesses outperforming peers, particularly in office, retail, residential, and leisure and hospitality. And that's a wrap for today's Business Brief. I'm Robert Tan. Join us again tomorrow for the stories that help you plan your next big, bold business move. Only here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.